Good morning. This is your ecclesiastical dropout, John Towler, tuning in again for this morning's reflection on behalf of the Avon Valley Churches, a group of parishes situated on the southwest corner of the New Forest. I wonder what aspects of your interaction with other human beings you find most irritating. I know what mine are. My bête noire is the tendency in others to be what I call cappers. Either they have had the same or a similar experience and they want you to know about it, so they cap yours with theirs, which somehow discounts what you've just said. I'm sure you have yours. Whatever it is, the result is often a felt lack of positive recognition of who you are and the importance of what you have to say. So today I want briefly to reflect on what happens when you're not listened to, when others fail to hear the importance or see the significance of what you have to say and its consequences. My inspiration comes from an author, Jack Fairweather, written in a well-researched book called The Volunteer, which he calls a true story of the resistance hero who infiltrated Auschwitz. Witold Pilecki is a Polish underground operative in the Second World War, and his story is remarkable in that he willingly volunteers to infiltrate the Nazi concentration camp of Auschwitz, where in the summer of 1940 he recruits an underground army to sabotage the facilities, assassinate Nazi officers and gather evidence of the appalling abuse and extermination of Europe's Jews. In so doing, he risks his own life and that of others, including his wife Maria and family. It is not so much a gripping tale as taking the reader on a painstaking journey of daily risks and agonising daily tasks, as some of his fellow countrymen and women and children, and those throughout the whole of Europe, are gassed and indeed shot at his own feet. He sets up an elaborate system to send his reports of this unspeakable carnage and suffering to the Allied governments in Poland, Europe, including Britain and America. However, he experiences huge disappointment because frankly no one hears the gravity of what he's saying. It seems as though there is a massive denial by the Allies that anything like this could happen. One American official concluded that his reports are a wild rumour based on Jewish fears. Fairweather reports that the public line was that the Jews would be saved when Europe was liberated, and all resources should be dedicated to that object. Witold does make a successful attempt to escape from Auschwitz and returns to Poland to continue his crusade in what is an unsafe Poland under the rule of the Communist Party inspired by Stalin. He is eventually caught and shot and dies knowing that his valiant efforts came to little avail. I tell the story as an example of what happens when people, in this case politicians and generals, fail to listen hard and long enough to understand the severity of one very courageous man's effort and message. I guess there are many people in our community right now who feel that they are not being or have not been heard during this period of COVID-19. Maybe they're health professionals who have not been heard receiving the appropriate protective equipment, whether in hospital, care homes or other essential workers who desperately needed masks or testing. Maybe some of you are feeling angry at the loss of a loved one because you feel that they were not adequately protected going about their work. Yet again, maybe you feel trapped in your own home and are experiencing domestic abuse, which is becoming quite intolerable. Or tragically, for children who are defenceless in the face of physical and emotional abuse. Not being heard is frightening, often very angry-making, isolating, and resulting in feeling exasperated. What I do not want to do is to add in any way to your distress by way of blame, or to say in retrospect, well, the government should have done that or done this, or indeed apportioning any blame in a domestic abuse situation. For people of faith, we know that God listens. Sometimes for those who are people of faith and for those who are not, we need a tangible sign of God's listening ear in the actions of people around us. I recall my recent time in hospital when a patient would ring for a nurse and no one came immediately because they were busy elsewhere. I remember listening to their pleas and needing to go and finding someone to tell. There was something in the voice of a human voice pleading that compelled me to act. Maybe on my part a lot of it was to do with my lack of tolerance to listening to voices of desperation and pain not being answered. How alone and isolating that can be. It did remind me of why in hospital they call us patients. So thank God for all those who do listen to each other and families, as neighbours or as professional carers, and those who serve our community in so many ways. I like to think there are many more people who listen than who don't. And to remind ourselves that there are so many ways in which we can listen, hearing, seeing, through people's behaviour, demonstrating that we have heard by our replies to others, giving signs of recognition. Listening is just one way of showing compassion. And our role model as Christians, as always, is the example of Christ, who seems to have had an amazing attentiveness to the needs of others. Remember the woman who tugged his garment in the crowds? Who touched me, Jesus said. Deep down, we all crave for recognition, of being recognised for who we are and what we do, and that is entirely natural. Hence the need for giving all sorts of recognitions. Compliments, hugs, smiles, handshakes, some of which are sadly taken from us at the moment. And sadly for some who have only received negative recognition, often violent abuse by either words or actions, finding receiving compliments hard to accept. I remember well the reports of Erin Pitsey, the reporter who exposed the myth of domestic violence in her journaling. She noticed that women who were constantly abused were those who had unconsciously adopted a pattern of looking for and responding to the negative aspects of personality in partners, and thus kept in motion this cyclical notion of the nature of abuse. This, of course, applies both to men and women. One of the problems of lockdown and shielding is that whilst it serves a very important aspect in the protection of others from contracting coronavirus, it shields also the destructive and exploitive behaviours of the vulnerable. It was reported that incidents of domestic abuse had increased by 83% in this lockdown period so far. Likewise, we must remember that child abusers have not gone away, but are simply hidden even more. A close friend and colleague has written recently about the likely increase in the incidence of child abuse and a plea for our alertness to the same. As always, Christians must ask themselves, what is good news for those who suffer in this way? We can feel so hopeless and helpless to alleviate their pain and distress. My gut feeling for anyone being abused is get away from the abuser before it's too late. And how difficult that is. For others, it's about putting in place protective strategies, ringing for help, getting someone else to ring for help. Always, if someone is relating or alluding to a victim of this abuse, our job is to patiently listen and believe them, not to somehow say, well, this will pass, or changing the subject, but truly listening and being with them. It takes huge courage to make these life decisions for victims with long drawn-out consequences. Knowing of another's plight can arouse strong feelings of anger and hate towards the perpetrators of the abuse of whatever kind. That is natural and alerts us to the empathy and action which they need. Christ showed us that beyond the pain is the hope of a better life, a fuller, more humane life, a life in which love and peace and compassion is possible. This is the message of Easter, of the possibility of daily resurrections for us now. God knows each and every one of us in whatever situation we find ourselves. Like a faithful and loving mother and father, God will not abandon anyone. Our pain and suffering is shared. Our discipleship encourages us to be attentive, compassionate, listening and understanding, loving and forgiving people. And how hard is this? Also, taking action on another's behalf requires courage and is costly. Perhaps alerting the appropriate authorities where we know abuse is taking place is a course of action that we feel bound to follow. Of course, the safer place is to remain a bystander. There are no easy routes out of unjust situation, but the gospel does compel us to speak out. So, my friends, cultivate the activity of listening. Give recognition to all. Practice giving unconditional compliments to those around you. When invited to respond negatively, refuse and change the subject, or simply let the conversation plop. How hard it is to be Christ-like. Witold Pilecki died a disappointed man because no one took his message seriously. Let us not disappoint others by our bystanding, by ignoring the cries of the vulnerable child, the vulnerable man or woman. Christ in trusting the unknown outcome of the cross, is raised to life. That is a challenging pattern for all of us in our daily living, especially right now. So, my friends, be alert and go well.